I was 22 the night it happened. Nick was obsessed with Halloween. He built mazes out of cardboard, filled the place with horrifying props, and spent way too much money making his house feel like a haunted attraction. That night, me, Nick, and a few others, Vinny G, Joey, and Q, were upstairs in his room smoking when the loud bangs from downstairs froze us in place. At first we thought it was part of the party, but the screaming that followed told us otherwise. Nick opened the door and saw enough to come back in with pure terror on his face. He told us to hide, and we didn't argue. Lights went off. Nick and Joey hid in the closet. I slid under the bed with Q, and Vinny squeezed into a storage box. Moments later, the music downstairs cut out and we heard a man screaming at everyone to shut up. A gunshot silenced the crowd. Then heavy boots came up the stairs, stopping outside Nick's door. The knob rattled, then the door was rammed, and finally shots blasted the lock apart. I held my breath as Black Boots stepped inside. The man went straight to the closet, yanked it open, and dragged Nick out. Nick begged, even offered money, but they marched him downstairs. The rest of us stayed frozen, listening to muffled voices and more silence that seemed to stretch forever. When the intruders finally left, Nick returned upstairs pale and shaking, telling us there had been 4 of them, all in coats, gloves, fedoras, and vendetta masks. They had demanded $100,000 and, when Nick couldn't provide it, forced partygoers to hand over wallets and valuables to people. Didn't survive our friends Jen and Robbie. Seeing their bodies on the floor when we finally came out was the single most horrifying moment of my life. Police were called, but the masked men were never caught. Nick never recovered. He drowned in guilt, believing he'd caused his friends' deaths. He spiraled into drinking meth, then heroin. Less than a year later, in July 2013, he overdosed. Every Halloween since, I think about that night and how quickly fun can turn into something you never escape. It was my first Halloween in my own house, a small corner place with a basement but no upstairs. And I was settling in that night with horror movies on TV when around 11 p.m. a knock came at the door, thinking it was just late trick-or-treaters or kids pulling a prank. I ignored it, but when the pounding grew louder, I got annoyed, opened the door, and found no one there, which rattled me more than I wanted to admit. So I checked the bushes and the driveway, found nothing, and locked up tight before heading to my bedroom, even locking the door just to feel safer. Yet the knocking didn't stop. It went on and on for what felt like half an hour until I dozed off, only to jolt awake at 2 a.m. to the sickening realization that the knocking wasn't coming from the front door anymore, but from my bedroom door. My heart was hammering as the knob twisted and rattled like someone was forcing their way in, and I grabbed around for anything to use as a weapon, panicked and half convinced I was about to die. But then I remembered my surround sound system, so I scrambled to plug in my phone, searched for a gunshot sound effect on YouTube, cranked the volume to the max, and blasted a single shot through the speakers, then shouted that it was a warning and if they didn't leave I'd shoot them in the head, praying they'd believe me. And unbelievably, it worked. I heard footsteps pounding across the wooden floors and the slam of the front door, as whoever it was bolted out into the night. When I finally cracked the bedroom door open, shaking uncontrollably, the house was silent, except the front door now stood wide open, proof that I hadn't been imagining anything. So I slammed it shut, locked it again, and called the police, who arrived and cleared the house but never found anyone inside. And that's where the story ended, with no real answers, just the chilling memory of strangers pounding at my bedroom door in the dead of night, and the thought that if I hadn't played the gunshot, if they hadn't believed me, if I had opened the door, I might not be here to tell the story every Halloween since. I've never been able to relax fully at night, because in the back of my head I always hear the knocking. I was 14 that Halloween, too old to trick or treat but too young to feel completely at ease staying home alone. So when my mom asked me to hand out candy while she took my little sister out, I agreed, happy to feel useful. For the first hour everything was normal. Kids in costumes rang the bell, I passed out candy, and I Watch the Friday the 13th marathon on TV until the kitchen phone rang with the ringer so loud. It startled me out of my seat, and when I answered, there was nothing but fumbling noises, as if someone was holding the phone awkwardly. Then they hung up, which I brushed off as a prank. But when the phone rang again, the silence was heavier, and I could hear faint breathing. And though I laughed nervously and accused my best friend, Steve, of messing with me, the call ended without a word. Later that night, the phone rang a third time, and after another long pause, a distorted, deep voice finally spoke. "I'll be paying you a visit tonight," which hit me like ice water down my spine. Though I forced a laugh and cursed at them before hanging up, telling myself it was just Steve again, until half an hour later, all the power in the house went out, and once the TV died, the lights went black, and I froze in total darkness before furious pounding shook the front door. And I screamed without thinking, only to hear laughter outside. And when I opened the door in anger, there was Steve, grinning like it was the funniest prank in the world. But when I confronted him about the voice on the phone, he looked genuinely confused and said all he'd done was breathe heavily and hang up, that the deep voice hadn't been him. And that's when the bottom dropped out of my stomach. Together we checked the fuse box outside, and I'll never forget the sight of the wires cleanly cut with a tool someone had actually been there, preparing for a real break-in while I thought it was just a joke, and whoever it was had used the phone to torment me before moving in, probably watching from the shadows. Steve and I ran back inside, locked up, and called my mom, who alerted the police. And later we learned the calls had come from a pay phone near a bar. But the truth is no one was ever caught. And to this day I can't shake the thought that while we were laughing it off, someone out there was ready to make their visit real. I was still young enough to be out trick-or-treating with friends when we first noticed him. A man standing perfectly still on the sidewalk in a mask, holding a lantern, not saying a word as we walked past, but his head turned slowly to watch us. And though it creeped us out, there were plenty of people around, so we moved on to the next house, only to spot him again a few blocks later, standing farther down the street, and then again in another house, each time just close enough that we knew it was deliberate. Somehow, even though we were moving at a normal pace, he seemed to keep up without us ever seeing him walk, which made the whole thing feel surreal, like a scene out of a horror movie. And eventually, when we let our guard down, we turned from one porch with candy in hand and froze. The masked man was waiting in the middle of the road, staring straight at us, blocking our way back to the sidewalk. And suddenly the fun of the night evaporated as panic set in. So we knocked frantically back on the door we'd just left and begged the homeowners to look. Pointing to the man in the street, they stepped outside, and only then did the stranger finally move again, walking slowly down the block until he was swallowed by the crowd. But he never came back that night, at least not to us. Later, though, we learned from an adult family friend that he'd seen what sounded like the same masked figure, hiding behind a tree, actually trying to wave little kids over, and only backed off when threatened with a call to the police, which turned our shivers into something much darker, because suddenly it wasn't just a creepy Halloween act anymore, but something potentially dangerous. A man who had picked Halloween night, the one night where masked strangers go unnoticed to blend in and stalk children without raising alarm. And while he disappeared before anyone could identify him, I'll never forget the way he stood watching us, silent and patient, as if he had all the time in the world. It left me wondering whether we'd just cross paths with a dedicated prankster, or something far worse, and that lingering doubt is what makes the memory stick with me even now, long after the candy and costumes are gone. It was Halloween night, and my two friends and I were wandering through the neighborhood, bags of candy in hand, laughing and talking too loud, when we first noticed the black Jeep creeping down the street with its headlights dimmed, moving slower than any normal car should. At first, we thought maybe they were just looking for a parking spot or keeping an eye on their kids. But then it turned onto the same block we were on and crawled along behind us, close enough that the hum of the engine made the hairs on my neck stand up. And when we stopped walking to see what they do, the Jeep stopped too, sitting there idling, windows tinted so dark we couldn't see a thing inside, which sent a sick chill through all three of us. We tried to play it cool, acting like we didn't notice. But when we crossed the street, the Jeep rolled forward and made the same turn, almost matching our pace. And that's when real fear kicked in. We weren't imagining it. Someone in that car was following us. We decided to test it by ducking up a side street lined with houses and, sure enough, the Jeep swung in right after, headlights briefly flashing across us like a spotlight. And then one of the doors cracked open, just a few inches, before slamming shut again. And that sound of metal against metal made my stomach drop because I knew whoever was inside was thinking about getting out. Without saying a word, the three of us bolted, running as fast as we could, candy spilling out behind us, until we reached a friend's house whose parents were outside on the porch handing out treats. And only then did the Jeep peel away, tires screeching as it sped down the block, shaken. We told them everything, and the dad admitted he'd heard rumors of a similar Jeep cruising around the neighborhood earlier, scaring kids, and he called the cops. But by the time they arrived, the car was long gone. No plates, no description of the driver, nothing to give them. Just three terrified kids and the memory of a dark vehicle stalking us through the streets. On the one night, it could blend in without raising suspicion. And I'll never forget the sickening realization that if we hadn't run when we did, that open door might have meant one of us never came back. That Halloween night was supposed to be simple handout candy, get the kids to bed, and maybe relax with a movie, but instead it turned into one of the scariest moments of my life. My wife and I had taken our daughter trick-or-treating around the block, then tucked her into bed after she spent half an hour trading candy with friends in the living room. And everything felt normal until much later when I was downstairs cleaning up and heard her scream. From upstairs, the kind of scream that rips through you because you know it's pure terror, so I sprinted up the stairs two at a time, burst into her room, and found her standing on the bed pointing at her closet, crying that someone was inside. At first, I thought it was just a nightmare or the leftover nerves from watching too many Halloween movies. But then I heard it to the faint rustle of movement coming from behind the closet door, the unmistakable sound of someone trying to stay quiet, and my blood went cold. I yanked the door open, expecting maybe a raccoon had somehow slipped in or that my daughter had imagined it. But instead I came face to face with a man crouched in the corner, wide-eyed like a trapped animal, and it took me half a second to recognize him. It was our neighbor, a guy we'd only ever exchanged polite small talk with, now hiding in my little girl's closet like he belonged there. I didn't think. I just grabbed him by the arm and dragged him out while yelling for my wife to call the police. My daughter still sobbing behind me, and the whole time, he didn't say a word, just stared at us with a strange half smile that made me feel even sicker. When the cops arrived minutes later, they found a small knife in his pocket and later admitted he'd been acting suspicious in the neighborhood that night, maybe planning to scare someone, maybe worse, though they never gave us all the details. All I know is that for weeks after, my daughter couldn't sleep in her room without every light on, and I kept replaying the thought in my head. If she hadn't screamed, if I hadn't run up when I did, what might he have done? Hiding there in silence, waiting for the perfect moment. That closet has never felt like just a closet again, and as a reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones in stories, but the people living right next door. I had only been living in the house for a few weeks, still unpacking boxes and getting used to the creaks of the old wooden floors, when Halloween night rolled around, and instead of going out I decided to stay in, figuring I'd hand out candy to a few kids and then call it an early night. But as the evening dragged on, the doorbell rang less and less until the street outside grew quiet, and I settled onto the couch with a blanket and my phone, half dozing, when I heard footsteps upstairs. At first, I brushed it off as the house settling, but the sound was distinct, slow, heavy steps pacing across the bedroom floor directly above me, and my stomach tightened because I lived alone and hadn't had anyone over. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously climbed the stairs, calling out in a shaky voice. But there was no answer, only silence. and when I pushed open the bedroom door, the room was empty. Though the air felt colder somehow, like the kind of cold you feel standing in the shadow of something you can't see. Uneasy, I went back downstairs and tried to shake it off. But later that night, as I passed the hallway mirror on my way to bed, I froze behind me in the reflection. Just for a second, I saw a figure, impossibly tall, its head nearly grazing the ceiling, thin and still as if carved from shadow. And when I whipped around, nothing was there, only the hallway stretching back into darkness. I barely slept, and the next night it happened again. The footsteps, the faint sense of being watched, the glimpse of something just out of sight, until I finally confided in a neighbor who admitted that people in the area whispered about the house being haunted, though no one could tell me exactly why, only that families never stayed long. I told myself it was stress, that my mind was playing tricks on me, until one night I woke up to the sound of breathing, low and steady, in my bedroom. And through the dim light from the street lamp outside, I could make out a shape by the door towering and motionless. Watching it, I lay frozen, afraid to move, until the morning sun filled the room and the space was empty again. It's been years since then, and though I don't live there anymore, the memory of that tall figure has followed me, as if moving out didn't mean I'd really left it behind. It was supposed to be harmless Halloween fun when my friends and I went to the haunted house on the edge of town. One of those pop-up attractions with strobe lights, fake blood, and actors in masks jumping out to scare people. And for the first half hour, that's all it was. We laughed, screamed, and shoved each other through dark hallways, but about midway through, I noticed a man in a pig mask who wasn't acting like the others. While the staff members would pop out, scream, then retreat, this guy lingered, standing too close, following us from room to room. And at first we thought he was just committed to the role, but the longer it went on, the stranger it felt, especially when he followed us out of the back exit. Instead of staying inside with the other performers trailing us across the parking lot in complete silence, we assumed it was still part of the show until he kept walking behind us. After we reached the street, never speaking, never breaking pace, and when we turned a corner and stopped, he stopped too, just standing there in the glow of a street lamp, tilting his head like he was studying us. One of my friends shouted at him to cut it out, that the joke was over. But he didn't respond, only took a slow step forward, then another, until panic finally broke through our nerves and we ran, sprinting toward the main road where more people were gathered. And when we looked back, he was still there, watching. But this time, he didn't follow, just stood in the distance like a statue, the pale rubber pig mask glowing faintly under the streetlight, shaken. We told the haunted house staff what happened, but they swore no one in a pig mask was working that night, and even showed us the list of costumes: clowns, zombies, vampires. But no pigs, yet all three of us had seen him clearly, and that's what made it worse. The realization that whoever he was, he wasn't part of the act, just a man who slipped in unnoticed, blending perfectly into a night where masks were expected, and for reasons we'll never know decided to follow a group of kids into the dark. To this day, the sight of a pig mask makes my stomach knot, because I'll always remember that eerie figure in the street, silent and patient, watching as we ran and wondering what he might have done if we hadn't.